Okay, so it's Constitution's night, August 24th, I guess. Modesto Lodge 206. I'm with our worshipful master, worshipful one Americano, our senior steward, chef, brother Marcus Millet, and we prepared something for everybody. Look at that. And of course, our inspector, worshipful Romy Dominguez, and Brother Geoffrey Kada. Some of the visitors here. Worshipful Jack Hillsby, Worshipful Lee Coleman, Brother, our Master Mason, or Mason of the Year recipient for this year, Brother Brian French, Sister Hillsby, and our Junior Warden, Brother Stephen Stanfield, and our speaker for today. Okay, so that's Worshipful Lee Coleman. And that's Worshipful Jake. And his loving wife. Okay.
We're going to stand to do the Pledge of Allegiance before we get our prayer going and dinner. So if everybody would please stand and join me in the pledge.
I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, let's bow our heads in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together tonight. We thank you for our guests tonight and their ability to protect this community. We ask that you continue to keep them safe as they go out and protect our streets. And Lord, we just thank you for this opportunity to reflect on our Constitution and time that we can spend together. Bless this food to our bodies and let us have a good evening. Amen.
So mote it be.
All right, so if everybody can go ahead and start at the doors and help yourselves to lasagna bread and salad. I think there should be
A few moments later.
So I kind of made it a tradition to give some interesting constitutional facts as we prepare for our speakers, which I'll introduce here in a minute. But I tried to do something different than I've done the last couple of years, so we'll see if I did that. So the U.S. Constitution has about 4,400 words. It's the oldest and the shortest written constitution of any major government in the world. One of the biggest spelling errors, if you didn't notice, right above the signers, they spelled Pennsylvania wrong, which is kind of interesting. It's spelled wrong through the entire Constitution. Thomas Jefferson, he never signed the Constitution. He was in France during the Constitutional Convention where he served as a U.S. minister. John Adams was also serving as the U.S. minister to Great Britain during the Constitutional Convention, and he did not attend either. Since 1952, the Constitution has been on display in the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. If you've never been there, it's quite a sight. In fact, you can almost, you can barely see the letters and words on it anymore. It's so faint now, it's almost just a blank piece of paper. But currently, all 4 pages are displayed behind protective glass framed with titanium. It preserved the parchment's quality. The case contains argon gas. It's kept at 67 degrees Fahrenheit with 40% humidity. Americans generally recognize George Washington's indispensable role as Commander-in-Chief of American forces during the Revolutionary War and as the first president under the U.S. Constitution. Many know he presided over the Constitutional Convention that drafted the Constitution, but few fully appreciate his key role in forming and framing that document. They say that James Madison was the Constitution's chief architect, and some textbooks say that Washington was its general contractor, and that he, more than anyone else, got the work done during the convention. Washington intended to retire from public service following the American Revolution and leave the country's political future to others. He envisioned an energetic republic under the 13 states and the vast western territories ceded by Britain under the treaty recognized American independence. He said as much in his 1783 circular letter to the states issued at the time, when he despaired over the Confederation's inability to pay its troops and repay its creditors. In 1784, a trip to inspect his western properties, which showed him the nation's tenuous hold on its land west of the Appalachians, reinforced his conviction that the Articles of Confederation, then looping the states into a loose alliance, must be revised to give the central government effective control over interstate commerce, foreign affairs, and national defense, and its own revenue. To him, these were essential to promote liberty, protect property, and preserve independence. When the convention did obtain a quorum, it promptly chose Washington as its president and turned to the matters of rules. Those rules provided that so long as it represented each state would have one vote, and a majority of states represented could carry a vote, and most controversially secretly would prevail throughout. With windows shuttered and doors closed, the members met day after day, 6 days a week for more than 3 months. With no air conditioning and the humidity of Washington. I think if you've ever been there, it is extremely humid. Due to the strict enforced secrecy, the only record for the proceedings came from Madison's minutes, which he kept private for a generation, and the official tally of motions and votes and a scattering of personal notes are in his letters. Evidence abounds for Washington's influence in shaping various provisions of the Constitution and for securing the compromises that kept the convention on track, but his role in crafting the executive offers as good an example as any of the part he played in Philadelphia, since everyone presumed that Washington would be the new government's first executive. No one could conceive of a position without thinking about him in it. Indeed, within the year, South Carolina's Pierce Butler flatly stated that his colleagues at the convention shaped their ideas and powers to be given to the president by the opinion of Washington's virtue. I think there's no secret that I bring up Washington because, as we all know, Washington is probably one of the most famous Masons in our history. Many of us recognize Washington as a Mason, and there's very few people that have not seen a picture of George Washington in his Masonic apron, one of which adorns our hallways. Washington joined Freemasonry in the lodge at Fredericksburg, Virginia. He was 20 years old when he received his first degree of entered apprentice on November 4th of 1752. He paid the lodge £2 and 3 shillings to join. I don't know how much that is, but that's correct. 10 days after turning 21 on March 3rd, 1753, he was passed to the second degree of fellowcraft, and on August 4th of 73, he was raised to the third degree of Master Mason. The lodge's surviving minute book records Washington's attendance only 2 more meetings, on September 1st of 1753 and January 4th, 1755. Many of Washington's brothers in the Fredericksburg Lodge later served within the Constitutional Army or the Virginia Militia, including Hugh Mercer, George Wheaton, and Thomas Posey. Washington's mother lodge, was renamed and numbered as Fredericksburg Lodge number 4 after the creation of the Grand Lodge of Virginia in 1778, and it continues to be today. At Washington's 1799 funeral, Brothers of Alexandria Lodge performed Masonic rites. After Martha Washington's death, the lodge acquired many valuable items from the estate, including a Masonic apron sent from France in 1793. With these items and many curiosities, the lodge opened a museum in 1812. In 1910, the George Washington Masonic National Memorial Association was formed. And in 1932, the association dedicated its Great Masonic Memorial to Washington and Alexandria, Virginia. Today, Alexandria Washington Lodge, number 22, displays many of its valuable Washington artifacts and continues to meet there. The George Washington Masonic National Memorial welcomes the public 7 days a week to view its many exhibits and enjoy the spectacular view at the top of its 333-foot tower. Washington himself best articulated his membership in a relationship to Freemasonry when he replied to the Brethren of King David's Lodge in Newport, Rhode Island in 1790, and these are his words: "Being persuaded that a just application of the principles on which the Masonic fraternity is founded must be promotive of private virtue and public prosperity, I shall always be happy to advance the interests of the society and to be considered by them as a deserving brother." So on this night, we typically like to invite members that are working within our public. Over the years, we've had police officers, district attorneys, mayors, and this year I've invited 2 special guests to me. They're 2 people that I've worked my entire career with. Captain Jason Grogan was actually my training officer. I don't even know if you remember, back in 1997-ish. He trained me, and I used to ride with him until he had one of his kids. And he had to leave from maternity leave because he ended up having one of the babies, which is now probably an adult. And Assistant Chief Ivan Valencia and I started just about the same time at the police department, and we spent our whole career together. So it is an honor for me to invite these men here. I spend a lot of time with them on my daily life, but they're both extremely valuable men in our police department. Captain Grogan oversees our patrol division, which is our largest division of our police department. Well over half of our staff work under the patrol division. It is the busiest and largest of our divisions, and that is typically what most people know when they talk about the police department, the black and white patrol cars that show up at your house when you call 911. So those are the ones that Captain Grogan oversees, and it is probably the busiest and most active role of any division commander in our agency is to oversee patrol. On the other hand, Chief Valencia oversees everybody, and so he has the role of overseeing all of us. And Chief Valencia spends a lot of his time dealing with what is probably the most challenging thing that cops deal with. That's the funding for officers and the funding of how we pay for a lot of the stuff that we deal with, because nothing is free, and it's an extremely challenging position to have to oversee a very large budget and make sure that resources are being allocated properly. Both of these men have worked in law enforcement for well over 25 years. Captain Grogan is a second-generation officer. His father actually did my oral board interview as a sergeant, so it's an interesting concept, and he's going to talk to you about being a second-generation officer. But it truly is a privilege to have you both here. So I'll turn it over to Captain Jason Grogan to give a few comments.
Thank you. Steve actually took a lot of things I always thought the first part I was going to say was my introduction. So, as Steve said, I have been a police officer for 27 years with the Modesto Police Department. I'm in my 20th, and I am the captain in the operations division. I not only patrol the black and white officers, but also our traffic unit, our CR unit, which is our crisis response unit, SWAT, and our crisis negotiation team. Those are some of the other things that I oversee as well. And Steve as well. Steve and I actually work together on a daily basis. So what I oversee is what he oversees. So we're partners in that part. For myself, I was born and raised in Modesto. My father was a homicide detective in Modesto, and he retired as a sergeant in 2001. As Steve said, I am second generation. When he asked me to speak tonight, I looked back at the Constitution, and it's been some time, obviously in high school, college, and we study the Constitution. Even in the police academy, we talk about the Constitution as well. But looking back at how I was raised, what I learned in school, in the police academy, and obviously out as a police officer, I really noticed a lot of similarities. As you know, in the preamble of the Constitution, we the people, I realized both my parents shared the role of being a disciplinarian in my household. My father wasn't more heavy-handed than my mom. It was an equal share in our household is how I was raised. It wasn't like go talk to your dad, go talk to your mom. They raised equally in that aspect as a constitution, right? It's we the people, not one sole king is our constitution. As I was taught as an early age to work hard, treat people fairly. My parents were strict, but they always allowed me the freedoms to kind of make my own choices. And with that, I made mistakes, but they guided me along that way. In high school, as I said before, learning the Constitution, in our U.S. history and civics class, basic laws and principles of our nation ruled by the people. In college, we just took a deeper dive into that of the Constitution, Bill of Rights, the amendments. But it wasn't really until becoming a police officer in the academy that it really it hit home for me as to the similarities with Constitution and law enforcement. Our freedoms are afforded by our forefathers, and that's an extremely special right that we have in the U.S. Being a police officer, I know that when I make a traffic stop, placing citizens in handcuffs or even placing them in jail, those are rights and freedoms that are being taken away. And I, as other officers, take that extreme power extremely serious. In the police academy, every officer is instructed on the law enforcement code of ethics. The code is important to the Modesto Police Department that we have it mounted in our patrol briefing room and several other rooms throughout our department as well. Some of the code, it actually consists of ethical mandates law enforcement officers use to perform their daily duties. These guidelines include exercising discretion, using only necessary force, maintaining confidentiality, integrity, and a professional image at all times. In closing, I want to go over the first paragraph in the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics. I think that you'll see the similarities with the Constitution preamble and the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics, kind of how we draw this together. So as a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve the community, safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and the peaceful against the violence or disorder, and to respect the constitutional rights of all to liberty, equality, and justice. The Constitution and Law Enforcement Code of Ethics are very similar. They both discuss laws, freedoms, and equal treatment to citizens. Which, in looking back, is how my parents really raised me as well, equally. So with that, it was thank you, Steve, for asking me to speak here tonight, because it was pretty cool to reflect on my childhood upbringing and looking at the Constitution, kind of circling it all back together. So with that, yes, I'm extremely proud to be a second-generation officer for Modesto. So thank you for having me tonight. I appreciate it.
So good evening, everybody. My name is Valencia. Like Steve mentioned, I'm the Assistant Chief of the Modesto Police Department. Every time I talk to a new group, I always like to tell them a little bit about myself, just so that you get to know me a little bit better, get to know where I'm coming from, my story a little bit better. I was born in Los Angeles County, in Glendale, California. I didn't move to Modesto until I was about 19 years old. This is now my home, and I've lived here for over 25 years. I'm married. I have 2 children. My son, my youngest, is 14. My oldest is 18. One just started high school. He's a freshman. And my oldest son, he just started his second year of college, and he's going to the JC. I met my wife here in Modesto, and as Steve mentioned, we've kind of started at the Modesto Police Department around the same time. I think Steve has a few months ahead of me. I was sworn in January of 1998 as a reserve police officer. And I didn't even know what a reserve police officer was, but the fact that I could be a police officer part-time really appealed to me, because I could go to school and get my education while still playing police officer on the weekends, or anytime I had the chance, any extra time I would dedicate that to going out and working patrol. In July of 2000, I was hired as a full-time police officer, and what made the decision for me to go full-time was the job just started encompassing my life. I fell in love with the work, and then it also started taking time, because I would have to go to court for cases, and I could no longer do my other job, which was working for Bank of America at the time. So in July of 2004, I started the academy. The academy was about 6 months, and then I went out in the field. When I reflect as to what the Constitution means to my profession, it's interesting. It's so intertwined that it's almost second nature. You can't unweave law enforcement, at least in the United States, from the Constitution. So much so that when we get sworn in, we do an oath of office, and within that oath of office is very similar to the oath of taking when you go into the military. You swear an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. Being in California, you also do for the California Constitution, and not only do we do it when we get sworn in as an officer, but every time we progress in rank, there's also sworn in. So I've done that. I've done that oath 6 times, probably Jason about the same, and Steve about the same. And so every time we get promoted, or when we get initiated to law enforcement, you're always reminded of the importance of the Constitution. Right? And it's not to defend the President of the United States. It's not even to defend the government per se, but the Constitution, which is the foundation of our government, and what kind of frameworks our laws as well. And obviously, law enforcement, that's a big part of our job, is maintaining law and order, and enforcing our nation's and states and municipal laws. As far as in my career, and I'm sure it's a similar experience for everybody that's gone into law enforcement, the biggest challenge to the Constitution and to the Bill of Rights is technology. That is something that's always pushing the boundaries of what the forefathers who wrote the Constitution. And for a simple example, I'll take a cell phone, right? When the Constitution was written, there was no landline cell phones, and certainly no cellular cell phones. And how that plays into laws in the Constitution is when cell phones first came out, they were to what we have now, very simple devices. The ones we have now we call smartphones, but a cell phone, when they first came out, it allowed you to make calls, and at the most, maybe enter contacts, right? Your most frequent numbers. And so, in the beginning, when cell phones first came out, we had, as a law enforcement officer, we made an arrest, we had a right to search that phone for content. And as phones progressed, maybe there was text messages. And that was just a right. You arrest somebody, I can search your phone. As technology progressed, that is no longer the case. Because the cell phone has progressed so much, it's now now they call them smartphones, right? It's more of a computer now, and it's not only a device to make phone calls and to keep your contacts, your stored numbers, but now you keep photographs. Right now it's a photo album. It does basically what a computer does. You can store files, information, text messages, videos. So now there's privacy, attachments to that cell phone. So now when we make an arrest, it's not a given anymore that we can go and grab a phone call. There has to be nexus, and many times we have to now get a warrant that's authorized by a judge. You have to have probable cause now to look into that cell phone, where in the past you were free just to look at it. So when it comes to the Constitution and technology, for me, that's where we get the biggest challenges, is that it's always pushing that envelope further. And what's so brilliant about the Constitution is it's a living document, right? It's not fixed, it can always be amended. Judges are able to weigh, when laws are made, judges are able to weigh whether those laws are constitutional or not, and how they're interpreted. And so it's more sometimes important, the spirit of the law, than what's actually written. We have to go what we believe the forefathers believed was the, I guess, the tribal right of every citizen, and not violate those rights, if that makes sense. And in closing, it's just that, like I said, for me, it's almost second nature. I'm sure it's for Jason, and you almost want to kind of look, do some research before you come here, because you you don't think about it, but it's, you can't separate law enforcement, public safety, and the Constitution.
Thank you both for coming here tonight and spending some time with us. I know this has been a long day for you both, because I've been with you both all day. So, no, I really appreciate it. I'm not going to speak as a member of the police department. I'm going to speak as a member of this lodge. I know we in here, and I think I can speak for all my brothers in this room, we really appreciate everything that you both do to keep the citizens of the city of Modesto safe. It's not an easy job. We know that. We have many in public safety, many of our first responders work here in the medical industry here. But we appreciate you taking the time to come out and talk to our group, and just everything that the law enforcement profession does in Modesto. I mean, I know how much you do every day because I'm there, but this group also knows how much you do every day, and Modesto Lodge number 206 appreciates everything that Modesto PD does for them. Does for this facility and protecting us here, and you're welcome here anytime. So thank you both for joining us. Please, before you leave, have something I'd like to take 1 second and acknowledge Marcus before we leave. Marcus was so kind to me today. I told him I didn't have time to get here to cook, but if I got the food here, we could take care of it. And Marcus took care of everything for dinner tonight. I just dropped off food, just like it was the easiest thing ever. I just dropped it off here, and he magically made dinner happen. So, Marcus, I thank you personally from the bottom of my heart. I volunteered to do it, but you stepped up and did it. I give you a round of applause for dinner. Thank you so much, Marcus. I know these gentlemen won't be here much longer, but if you have any questions before they leave, I know they'll both answer any questions. When they don't have time to answer, you can always ask them.
Huh? Can you repeat here?
Are there any questions? Anybody? Lee, you can't ask questions. Anybody else?
No, I don't have. You have a question?
Lee's got one.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a notification that's coming around about a 1% sales tax to help the police department and homeless and all that. And you know, we all feel like we're taxed to death. But when I was reading it, I really read through it, and it said we weren't going to tax like medical stuff and food. So I'm kind of on the fence on this. Can you tell me how you feel about it?
So they're on duty, so they're not allowed to answer. But I am off duty, Lee, and I will give you some facts about that. Now, first of all, I'm not going to tell anybody what my opinion is on what you should or should not do when it comes to your voting for your own taxes. That is a personal decision that you're going to make. What I will tell you is the fact of the tax is the city of Modesto has a 7.875 sales tax rate, which is the lowest of any of us around. I will tell you as fact that all of our surrounding cities have a public safety tax on their initiative ballots, and you pay more taxes in all of our neighboring cities to help fund city budget. Out of that, about 1% of that comes back, 1 cent of that comes back to this city. Most of that 7.875 goes to the state. Most, like 6.875. At the city's current financial state, if they don't raise the sales tax, there's going to be a severe change in how business is done. That includes police, that includes fire, that includes trees, that includes roads, the city. The benefit of this tax is in years past, there's been, I think, 2 ballot initiatives over the years. This will have a citizen oversight committee that will not be council. It will be citizens of the city that will have an oversight to see how the money is spent and make sure it's not being spent or misused. Currently, 80% of the city's budget pays for public safety. That's Modesto Police and Modesto Fire, 80% of the current budget. And if we don't do something, the pandemic hit Modesto very hard. I'm just not going to be around the bush. The pandemic hit most of us pretty hard, but financially, that's what it is. So the tax initiative is completely a choice, but It's fair to let you know that the bulk of the taxes that you pay in this county and in this city don't go back to the city. And so they're looking to refund some of that money back to the city. And all of that 1 cent will be spent in the city.
See, I can, like Steve mentioned, I can't publicly talk about the tax, especially on duty, but I can tell you the state of the police department, right? And how public safety works for Modesto. And at the moment, we're allocated 210 officers for the Modesto Police Department. Back in 2007, I believe we were allocated 289 officers. So the city has grown, the population has grown, but our allocations for police has declined a significant amount. And so that puts us at a average of 0.95 officers per 1,000 in our city. Other cities like Stockton are at 1.5. And if you look at other states, they're close to 2 per 1,000. So we're significantly understaffed as a municipality, as a police department. Where we see it in public safety, my biggest concern, my personal concern for the safety of my family comes from traffic. Traffic enforcement it's almost, I wouldn't say non-existent, it's there, but our traffic unit is comprised of 4 officers and 1 sergeant. Going back to 2007, where we're at 20 traffic officers. And if you're like me, you live in Modesto, traffic has to be a concern and a priority. And so what staffing would do for us is we would increase that traffic unit. We would want it back to the numbers of 2007, where we had about 20 traffic officers enforcing speeding. Back in 2007, it was very common to see a motor officer. Motor officers are the ones on motorcycles. Those are traffic enforcement officers. On Scenic, right? You would see them on Scenic, Oakdale, Sylvan. Now that's very rare because they also do our major crash investigations. Well, you don't have traffic enforcement, you have more fatalities, more crashes. They're dedicating a lot of their time just in investigations and not have the opportunity to be proactive. There are things that, there are challenges now in our city that the police department never had to deal with before, right? Homelessness was not a police issue 10 years ago, at least not what it is now. And so now there's more of a social service aspect that we task our police to do, but with less resources. And just, and Steve said there are other municipalities in this county that have a specific public safety tax. What they're proposing here is not specific to public safety. It would, benefit other departments as well. Big thing for me is light. When I drive down the Kennedy, I don't like to see weeds sometimes that are as tall as trees. I think our city deserves and needs more maintenance, more beautification. And so, we're, as a city, the other departments are the same as the police department. They're all having staffing shortages. Sacrifices were made in 2010, when we got the fallout of the recession. And we haven't recovered. And that is really what we're focusing on. Like I said, I can't talk about tax measure. Steve gave you some details, but I'm just kind of giving you kind of the health of our police department and some of our other city departments. And I really do think Modesto does deserve better.
So what you're really saying is you need the money. And we really, I understand that.
I will be honest with you, Lee. If we don't get the money, we will have to make do with what we have. But we'll have to change how we operate.
And I throw in a quick thought about George Washington.
Of course.
At toward the end of the Revolutionary War, I'm kind of a history buff, so Cornwallis was kind of cornered on one section of New York and Boston, and there wasn't any fighting at the moment. And George Washington would go across the river to a lodge meeting in Cornwallis's lodge. And you all know who Cornwallis was. He was the leader of the British Union. Just a throw it.
Any other questions?
Oh, this is not actually a question, but I would just like to acknowledge Brother Steve here and Worshipful One for materializing this Constitution night. and I'd like to thank you to the officers for their time. And secondly, if there's no restriction, if we have pictures together for, you know, I have to report this to, to send this to the Grand Lodge, that how we react, how we, public awareness, and how we work with the community, especially with the law enforcement. Thank you.
All right, no more questions.
I can take pictures.
Okay.
Let's grab a picture.
Doon tayo.